The lava snake. A mysterious beast of unknown origins, and with no clear answers as to whether it's real or just the stuff of legend until now. If you've been playing Minecraft for any amount of time, then no doubt you know one of the biggest, most important rules to follow when you're out exploring the overworld. Never, ever dig straight down under any circumstances. And no doubt you've got some memories of exactly why that's such a bad idea. Maybe you dug a few blocks too deep and fell into a wide underground chasm below. A fall from that height, and you no doubt would have lost all your hearts and the resources you spent hours gathering. Or perhaps it wasn't just a sharp drop waiting for you underfoot. Some of you might have mined straight down and landed feet first in some lava. Now that's one heck of a way to go. At least you'd get a blaze of glory though. But did you ever stop to think why there's so much lava and wide open underground spaces beneath the surface of the overworld? So close beneath the surface, in fact, that it normally only takes a few short moments to dig down and find yourself in the perils of this underground world. Was the overworld always riddled with more holes than Swiss cheese? Or has something been tunneling through the ground right beneath our feet without us knowing? Could this all be the work of the lava snake? Well, there's only one way to find out. If you were to ask around, you might get lucky and run into the very villager who could tell you the tale. Or those you ask might have no clue what a lava snake is, so it's best to look as high and low as you can. In fact, venturing lower might be your best bet. Sometime during your search, you might come across an unassuming cave that branches out from the main path. Instead of following the obvious direction, the braver explorer will venture off down these hidden, winding underground paths. Some might lead to just further miles of stony caverns. Others might be laden with resources like diamonds and redstone for you to mine to your heart's content. But some caves just might lead you to the answers. Hidden somewhere beneath the overworld, there is an altar with an ancient tome hovering above it, and contained within its pages is the true story of the lava snake. The tale within the book begins many, many centuries ago. It was a time of magic and mysticism. The overworld was far different than it is today. Great wooded villages covered the land, contained within the safety of wooden walls. Inside, the citizens were protected from the dangers of the overworld. Undead mobs like skeletons and zombies would rise from the graves at night, but couldn't scale the defensive perimeters of the villages. And those that came to attack the palaces of the rich and royal, or creepers who tried to blow holes in the walls, were swiftly defeated by the palace's royal guards. But that was only what the overworld looked like above ground. What about underground? Well, in this age, things were very different below the surface too. There, living and working in caves, carving out the stone, and using the wealth of resources they found, lived the trolls. They were a noble people, known for their stoic pride that could occasionally be interpreted as stubbornness. The trolls had a somewhat rocky relationship with the citizens of the surface, if you'll pardon the pun. They weren't enemies, but the people distrusted the trolls, so the underground dwellers usually kept to themselves. To the trolls in their culture, there was nothing more important than diamonds. They had lived underground for so many generations that they had already learned how to craft many useful tools, weapons, and even homes, creating villages of their own in the caves. But a troll who uncovered diamonds while mining was a lucky one indeed. Being surrounded by a wealth of resources, all different types of stones, a network of tunnels they could navigate, precious metals, and buried treasure, the trolls developed their very own utopia underground. They had town squares lit by flaming torches instead of the sun. Their skills at forging the armor and weapons were second to none. They could make steel helmets and chest plates that were as light as a feather, but still strong enough to protect the wearer with ease. But the greatest strength of the trolls, their relentless dedication to their craft, was also their biggest flaw. Many trolls would work so tirelessly digging away through caves for long hours that it left them exhausted. Some would even work all through the night, into the next day, or set up camp in the tunnels without returning to their homes for days at a time. But they were fiercely determined to mine all of the resources they could. The Troll King decreed that he wanted the trolls to have complete control over their world beneath the surface. The overworld could keep its fancy walled cities, but underground belonged to the trolls. So when the people in the overworld above began learning how to mine themselves, you can imagine how the trolls took it. You see, those living on the overworld had encountered problems with housing themselves within wooden cities and wooden walls. They were only safe as long as there was no fire. And as more and more in the overworld began to dabble in magic, pretty soon the safety of the wooden cities was threatened. Witches hurled fiery potions, wizards cast fireballs, and some even built portals to the nether, calling forth blazes, all to burn their way into the cities and spread chaos. Their only hope was to reinforce their structures with some stronger materials, so the citizens of the overworld turned to the art of mining and began to dig into the world below for stone and metal. Things were amicable at first. The trolls weren't exactly happy seeing surface dwellers in their caves, but there was no reason they couldn't also learn how to harness the many resources that lay buried underground. But it didn't take long for concern to spread among the trolls. A dispute over resources broke out when a troll mine worker dug their way through a tunnel only to find an overworlder filling their inventory with diamonds, the same diamonds the troll had been searching for. The concern of his people soon reached the king of the trolls. He too was wary of the surface dwellers, and now too many unsettling questions were being raised by their sudden interest in mining. Was this an early warning sign that the surface was preparing for a war against the trolls? Were they planning to plunder the underground for resources in order to take the homes the trolls had worked so hard to build? And were there even enough resources to go around? With two civilizations now digging to gather ore and stone, there were less for both. Something had to be done. The king thought. He was desperate to secure the future of the trolls in his kingdom by any means possible. And it was in his desperation that the king of the trolls turned to someone he didn't fully understand, and thus sealed the trolls' fate forever. During one of their many frantic digs trying to stay ahead of the overworlders, a troll miner came upon a man who looked to have been trapped in a small pocket cave deep underground. He was grateful to have been saved, and while the troll was wary of the stranger, he insisted on speaking with the king to deliver his thanks. The stranger stood before the king, and it was during this audience that he revealed his great secret. The man hadn't been trapped by a cave-in, nor was he one of the overworlders seeking to plunder all the trolls' resources. He was, in fact, a crimson wizard. Above ground, he had been banished from one wooden-walled city to the next out of fear for his magic. Then he'd run afoul of some bandits who had decided to imprison the crimson wizard underground for their own cruel amusement. Hoping to convey his gratitude to the trolls for freeing him, the crimson wizard offered his services to the king. Initially, the king of the trolls dismissed this notion. He was flattered by the praise the crimson wizard gave, but he had no interest in magic, unless the crimson wizard could conjure something that would allow the trolls to mine faster and gather more resources than their rivals. The crimson wizard replied that he might have just the thing, something that could tunnel through huge swaths of stone in moments. He explained to the king that there were many creatures roaming the surface world, and among them was the slithering snake. The crimson wizard said that if he could capture one and harness the power of the troll's furnace, then he could create the ultimate beast of burden for the underground kingdom. And as an added bonus, it wouldn't just make mining quicker and easier, but also could be used to scare the overworlders back to the surface. So the king agreed to the crimson wizard's plan, half thinking he wouldn't be able to pull off such a ludicrous idea. He instructed his best warrior to protect the crimson wizard as he returned to the overworld to find what he needed. The crimson wizard immediately set about finding a snake that he could tame and use to create the being he'd promised to the trolls. And after a few failed attempts at trying to use meat to lure a serpent, the crimson wizard made an interesting discovery. Hearing certain melodies played on a music box enticed the snake to come back down into the mines with him. He had tamed a snake. Now for the next step in his plan. The king of the trolls was impressed with the crimson wizard's efforts, although he'd never seen a snake before. The long, wriggling thing did freak him out a little, but he granted the sorcerer access to the most important place within the troll's underground kingdom, the Grand Furnace. Buried deep beneath the surface than anything else, almost at bedrock, was a mighty stream of lava. This wasn't any ordinary lava either. It was imbued with magical properties. The trolls had set up their forge there centuries ago because it was what gave their armor and weapons so much more strength. And now the Crimson Wizard was free to use it to create the Lava Snake. After he had cast his spell, combining the snake with the lava in the grand furnace and all its mystical properties, the Crimson Wizard proudly displayed his work to the king. The lava snake was loyal to the Crimson Wizard who had crafted it, and he was eager to show off just how useful his creation could be. He commanded the snake to slither through the underground caverns, followed by the king of the trolls and the Crimson Wizard himself. The lava snake could use the heat of its long body to burrow through stone in seconds. Whenever it reached a large amount of stone blocking its path, the creature would superheat itself, then explode with the force of numerous TNT blocks. The blast was powerful enough to clear the way for the trolls, and it left resources littered all over the cave for them to gather up. It took much less time mining like this than spending all those exhausting hours chipping away one block at a time with a pick. Impressed far beyond his expectations, the king of the trolls granted the Crimson Wizard a place at his side and accepted the help of the lava snake with their future mining endeavors. Little did he realize this was all going according to the Crimson Wizard's plans. The lava snake was almost too good at explosively clearing paths through the underground. Only a few trolls had to travel with the creature to gather up all the scattered stone and diamonds that it left in its wake. Meanwhile, the others were able to rest back at their underground homesteads. The lava snake was clearing huge areas beneath the surface in short seconds, leaving behind enormous empty chasms in its wake. And sure enough, when it came across the overworlders still mining with their pickaxes, the creature frightened them away almost instantly. They were terrified that the lava snake was some mighty underground beast that they had accidentally awakened, and it drove the overworlders back up to the surface. For a time, things seemed to be going well. The king of the trolls had no idea what the Crimson Wizard was really plotting. He'd been strategically directing the lava snake in a very particular direction, and gradually causing it to burrow closer and closer up towards the surface. It was only when it was too late that the Crimson Wizard's true intentions became clear. He wanted revenge on all the cities that had banished him, and he'd used the trolls' pride against them. He'd complimented his way into getting access to the grand furnace, and now he'd used the magic lava to create the ultimate weapon. The time for revenge was at hand. He directed the snake to slither directly underneath the cities of the overworld, and then, boom! Superheating the lava snake directly from the foundations of each settlement caused huge damage, blowing them to smithereens and leaving the overworld in ruins. Huge craters were left on the surface, gigantic chasms that connected to the caves the lava snake had slithered through. One by one, the Crimson Wizard used the lava snake to destroy the numerous places above. The king of trolls was outraged to find out he'd been betrayed and that the lava snake was being used for something so dastardly. He demanded the Crimson Wizard stop this madness at once. While they had been rivals, he had no longer had any quarrels with the overworlders. But the lava snake blowing up their cities could have been seen as an act of war. But the Crimson Wizard had no reason to listen to the king. After all, the mighty lava snake was his creature to command, and he threatened to next turn the snake's fiery powers against the trolls as well. There was a sudden rumbling from above. The Troll King worried it might have been an attack from the overworlders, acting in retaliation, but it was far, far worse. The lava snake unleashed its fiery wrath on the underground, burying the Troll King and the Crimson Wizard with it. And as for the lava snake, what became of it? Well, the story doesn't say. Perhaps without its master to guide it, it might just be wandering freely, slithering around under the surface of the overworld. Maybe, if you come across a lava fall while you're mining, that might be a spot the lava snake melted through, leaving hot, fiery lava in its wake. At any rate, it's best to be careful when you're exploring underground, and be careful if you decide to mine straight down, because the lava snake might just be waiting for you.